In the early morning hours of October the 2nd, 2017, in Las Vegas, Nevada, 64-year-old Stephen Paddock, a madman, a serial killer, a terrorist, opened fire from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Resort into a crowd of 22,000 people who were attending a country music concert. 59 people as of right now are dead. Over 500 people have been injured. When the police finally came in contact with him, in the hotel room that he was holed up in, he had committed suicide allegedly. And they found, more importantly, 23 weapons inside his hotel room, including multiple rifles, some with scopes, and they were altered to perform the function of an automatic weapon. Okay, which is not supposed to be something that you're supposed to be able to buy over the counter, but he had some sort of modifications applied to the weaponry to allow him to kill more people. When they finally got to his home, they found 19 more weapons. Okay, so this is not only a man who represents terrorism committed by whites. This is a man who represents the pathology, the insane mentality of the American gun culture. Now, in the immediate hours and day or so after, because I'm recording this on the 3rd, so it's barely just been 24 hours, a little over 24 hours since this went down. You're already getting the narrative in the media of avoiding to call him a terrorist. Only in America, okay, can you kill 59 people, the most, at least in modern history, not including the mass murder of black people. That's a whole different issue from back in the day. But in modern post-civil rights history, the deadliest mass shooting ever. Again, since that time period, since the 60s, because I'm not counting the era of lynching. Okay, which was worse than this even. Only in America can you have the largest mass killing in recent decades, with more people injured than anybody could possibly imagine. And this man isn't called a terrorist. And their justification for not calling him a terrorist is, well, we don't know what if he had religious motivations. We don't know if he had political motivations. And guys, be careful about some of this BS that you're hearing people put on social media. Because immediately before the cops even, and they still don't know everything, but immediately before, a lot of times before they had even given a press conference, you had these idiots on social media making all of these wild claims and posting up false photos of people who weren't even the right guy. Like, you have people who see incidents like this and they immediately jump to blame groups of people purely for propagandistic purposes. Okay, so we don't know anything about this guy yet, but you shouldn't need to do an investigation to call this an act of terrorism. And quite frankly, if he was of a different complexion, the dialogue would be very different right now in this country. I've talked about before, and a lot of other people have talked about this before as well, how this country goes to great lengths to protect the Dylan Roofs, who, he got a fucking Happy Meal or something before he went to. They took that dude to daggone a drive-thru at a McDonald's or somewhere. And whether it's Dylan Roof, whether it's the Aurora shooter, all of these guys are described as lone wolves. They're described as mentally ill and mentally deranged. It never becomes an introspection about the pathology of people who hoard guns. And would you guys believe that according to MarketWatch.com, this is a fresh article. Okay, this article was posted actually 3:12 in the morning on October the 3rd, so that's today. Smith & Wesson, the parent company of American Outdoor Shares, jump over 3% in afternoon trade. So this is talking about Monday. Shares of gun makers rallied Monday in the wake of what has been described as the deadliest mass shooting on U.S. soil. Smith & Wesson jumped 2.73%. I'm getting calls on my phone while I'm recording. Smith & Wesson jumped basically 3% in afternoon trade. Okay, the volume topped 3.7 million shares compared with the full day average of the past 30 days of only 2.1 million shares. Another weapons manufacturer, Storm, Ruger & Company, shares jumped 2.71%. Okay, it says analysts say the regulatory environment is among the biggest drivers of demand for guns, as fears of tighter regulation have boosted gun sales and share prices in the past. So this is absolutely insane. You have the deadliest mass shooting, again, in recent U.S. history. Not, well, if we're talking about shootings in particular, you have to separate shootings from lynchings. But the one of the deadliest mass murders ever on U.S. soil in recent history. And people go out and buy more guns. You have a bunch of Stephen Paddocks just waiting to go off. This guy apparently he had millions of dollars. I heard that he was involved in real estate in the past because he was spending up until, the days before the shooting itself. This dude was spending thousands of dollars in the casino. Like, so he had money, he had just money to blow, like, for no reason. And think about this. He had all of that money, thousands of rounds of ammunition, right? He couldn't even, and I'm glad, I'm not saying I want it to be otherwise, but he didn't even have the ability to use all of that. You're stockpiling. He stockpiled all of those weapons and all of that ammunition for what? Just to have it? Like, that is insane. That is. Look, I believe in the Second Amendment, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge that you have a lot of people, a lot of these Second Amendment advocates who are like genuine gun nuts. Like, they're legit gun nuts. And I mean that seriously. You have people who are hoarding guns who will never be able to use all of those guns. They're stockpiling like they're preparing for a damn invasion from God knows who. They're stockpiling guns that like they're preparing for a civil war. Okay, and some of these people are not mentally fit to own all of these weapons. And clearly this guy was one of those guys. And he wasn't on anybody's radar. He was able, this is white privilege 101. He was able to stockpile all of those weapons. Okay, it didn't set off any alarms. Okay, he supposedly passed all of his background checks. And, people online, they're going to talk about gun control, but really, let's be real, nothing is going to be done about this because we have a culture in America where you have politicians who care more about getting that payola from the NRA. Okay, they care more about getting those fact checks from the NRA than they do about American lives. That's like some sellout shit. That is what sellouts do. Sellouts put especially if you're in a position of power like a politician, not just some regular dude on the street. If you're a politician who has power and you have the ability to stop stuff like this from happening, and you're caring more about the money you're getting from gun manufacturers than you do about American lives and about mass murder, then you're a sellout. Like, there's no other way to really describe that. You've sold out the American people for your personal profit and your personal benefit. So a lot of these politicians have blood on their hands. Straight up. This is disgusting. And of course, like I said, this man is clearly a terrorist. He's not going to be called a terrorist. They're going to, trust me, they're going to find stuff on his computer. There's no way that a guy like this, who does something like this, doesn't have some sort of political leanings. Now, I don't know what those leanings are, okay, but something set this man off. You don't, but whether or not that information is going to come out is a whole different question. Because right now, you get people, when it comes to white mass murderers, you get people in society who go into cover-up mode, and they start hiding little bits and pieces of information. So I don't know if his political affiliations and his political leanings, whether or not he was connected to militias, whether or not he was connected to white supremacist groups. I don't know if that stuff is even going to come out. Hopefully it does, if that's there. But before I end this video, I want to tell you guys about this article from Newsweek. This article came out September the 27th, so not that long ago. And it says, the title of the article says, "White nationalism is as much of a threat to the United States as ISIS. FBI's open investigation show." Now, before I continue, like I said, I don't know what Stephen Paddock's political, cultural, or ideological leanings were. I'm not saying I know for sure he was a white nationalist. He might have been. But he might not have been. I don't know. But the common theme between what I'm about to read you about white nationalists and Stephen Paddock is that we're talking about, in both instances, we're talking about white people. Okay, and how the threat of terrorism from certain groups of white people, in this case white nationalists, gets largely swept under the rug. And the Democratic Party doesn't talk about this. The Republican Party doesn't talk about this. The media doesn't talk about this. There's a massive cover-up right now in this country. Outside of people who write about this stuff online, most people with, very, very large platforms just aren't talking about this. And it's a serious problem because people are going to get killed over this. So it says, the threat of white nationalist violence in the U.S. is at least as big a threat as that posed by the Islamic State and similar groups, the FBI revealed Wednesday. Director Chris Wray told the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee that there are currently 1,000 open investigations into domestic terrorist groups and another 1,000 probes into groups with radical Islamist ideology. So there are as many open investigations into domestic terrorist groups, and they don't really label what they mean by that, but you assume you're talking about basically non-Islamist groups, because there are another 1,000 probes into radical Islamist groups, or groups that hold that ideology, or groups they believe hold that ideology. But it says the similar numbers did not satisfy some members of the panel, with several complaining of a double standard in how attacks from white supremacists were investigated compared with those carried out by people who identified as having radical Islamist ideology. The number of attacks carried out by white supremacists were, quote, almost triple those carried out by people who identify with groups such as ISIS, said Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri. And government data obtained by The Hill suggests the number of white supremacist attacks compared to those from radical Islamist groups was as many as 2 to 1. So let me stop right there. Like, this right here shows you it's not just about a double standard. Of course there's a double standard. We've known that for years. It's actively being covered up. Okay, there's a concerted effort, and this goes into why they don't like to use the word terrorism when it comes to the Dylan Roofs, the Stephen Paddocks of America. This is why they do that. This is intentional. Okay, because once you label something terrorist, and once you say, okay, people of a certain profile, okay, might hold terrorist ideologies, the way that you go about interacting with people of that group is going to change. Okay, and they don't want to start profiling largely white conservative, men who stockpile weapons. That's basically your Republican base right there. So they don't want to go after a lot of people, not the entire Republican base, but they don't want to go after a certain percentage of the Republican base that they might have to include in some of these profiles of terrorists. Okay, they don't mind going after bases of people who vote Democrat overwhelmingly. They don't mind going after bases of people who they have historically viewed as their enemy, like Muslims and like black people. They don't care about that. That's very convenient. Okay, but once you start talking about white terrorism, specifically from conservatives for the most part, and specifically from white conservative men, and even more specifically from white conservative men who stockpile guns, okay, all of a sudden people start getting real funny style. They don't want to start building profiles of white supremacists and labeling them terrorists, because they are doing that, but they're very hesitant to call them terrorists. And this is not just a double standard. It's something that's deliberately being done. It's a form of protection, essentially. And it says Claire McCaskill continued and said, "We have had 0 hearings on the threat of domestic terrorists and the threat they pose and our response to it." Okay, it says McCaskill said, explaining there had been a number of hearings about ISIS, but none about white supremacists. Okay, then the article says, but said white nationalism is no more or less a priority for the FBI than that threats from terrorist groups or terrorist organizations. Then it says Director Chris Wray said that, quote, "We also work a lot with state and local law enforcement who can sometimes bring straightforward, easy to make cases, like homicide cases, things like that. A lot of the, quote, domestic terrorism cases we bring, we're able to charge under gun charges." You see that? They're not charging it with domestic terrorism. They're not doing that. They're bringing gun charges, explosive charges, and all manner of other crimes. You see, so this is what they're doing. They're not bringing them. They're not bringing charges of domestic terrorism. They're charging everything else outside of terrorism. They're getting them on gun charges and explosive charges, and if need be, maybe murder charges. Okay, everything to avoid the term terrorism. This is what they did with Dylan Roof. You had Loretta Lynch out there saying, well, we're going to charge him with a hate crime because hate crime was the original domestic terrorism. No, you charge him with domestic terrorism. Dylan Roof had a manifesto. See, even with the case of Stephen Paddock, they're saying that they haven't found any type of manifesto or any type of suicide note or anything like that. But even with the case in Dylan Roof had a damn manifesto. He literally said, "I'm doing this for political and racial reasons. I'm literally trying to start a race war." And they still didn't call him a terrorist. They brought hate crime charges. So this protectionism of white supremacy and this protectionism of terrorism committed by whites is a serious problem. And it goes to show you that the word terrorism is largely a politically charged, politically loaded word that is conveniently used against certain groups of people. Point blank, period. There is a tremendous amount of white privilege reeking with the use of that term terrorist. But that's why we need, people like myself, we need other people out there in new media who will start to challenge these narratives and create our own narratives. We no longer need the media to call this stuff terrorism. We now have Twitter. We now have Facebook. I even saw, Brian Williams, crazy behind on MSNBC last night, asking some commentators, why are people so pressed to call this terrorism? Like, really? Like, you need that explained to you, dude? Like, you need people to explain why we consider this terrorism? So that's all I wanted to say about this. This is a tragedy. It's disgusting as hell. But unfortunately, it's going to continue. It's unfortunately going to continue because nothing is going to be done about it. The NRA is going to continue to run these ads. They're going to continue to make these insightful, ads, putting targets on people's backs. You're going to continue to get, every time one of these shootings occur, gun stocks are going to soar because you get idiots who go out and buy more guns. This is just messed up. There's no other way to really describe it. That's all I really have to say about that.